The war that refuses to end. An in-depth analysis of the Russia-Ukraine war. Why it persists, who is shooting, and who gains while civilians pay the price. Snapshot. The human and material devastation. More than 3 years after Russia launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022, Ukraine remains a country at war. Front lines, daily artillery and missile strikes, repeated attacks on energy and civilian infrastructure, mass displacement and chronic humanitarian need. International agencies report millions of people whose lives are shattered. Internally displaced persons, refugees across Europe, and a domestic economy ravaged by destruction and the drain of defense spending. The latest consolidated humanitarian reporting continues to document very large numbers of people in need and repeated assaults on civilian infrastructure. An authoritative reconstruction estimate by the World Bank, EU, and UN placed Ukraine's rebuilding needs at roughly $524 billion following 3 years of war. A scale that makes recovery a decade-long effort and shows that damage has not stopped accruing as long as the conflict continues. Short answer: why the war is not over. At first glance, there are simple political reasons: irreconcilable goals, mutual distrust, and high war aims. But beneath that are deeper structural drivers that make rapid resolution unlikely. Asymmetric war aims. Moscow's declared objectives and Kiev's and its Western backers. Objectives are not minor differences. They are competing visions for security and political order in Europe. Russia has pursued territorial control and a buffer against NATO/EU influence. Ukraine, and its supporters, seek restoration of territorial integrity and security guarantees. When aims are zero-sum, compromise is politically costly. Military capacity and foreign support. The war persists because both sides retain the capability to continue. Russia with large, if strained, manpower and material. Ukraine with increasing Western military support, training, and high-tempo resupply of munitions. As long as Kiev can be rearmed faster than Moscow can decisively defeat it, the fighting continues. Western weapons supplies and training have repeatedly altered the operational balance, preventing a rapid Russian victory and enabling Ukraine to resist and counterattack. Economic and political incentives to continue. War economies develop winners and losers. In Russia, certain state actors and private actors have found ways to profit from sanctions, import substitution, or asset seizures. In the US and allied states, defense contractors and supply chains have seen massive demand for weapons, munitions, and logistics. These actors, while not the sole drivers, create political constituencies that make an exit more complex. Geopolitical competition beyond Ukraine. The conflict is not merely bilateral, it has become a focal point of global strategic rivalry. NATO and EU states view Ukraine's survival as a matter of European security architecture. China, Turkey, Iran, and others view the conflict through lenses of access, leverage, and regional strategy. This global embedding reduces the likelihood of a quick bilateral settlement. Domestic politics and legitimacy. Leaders on both sides use the war to rally domestic support, suppress dissent, or distract from internal problems. For Putin, the rhetoric of security and historical claims are central to political survival. For Zelensky and the Ukrainian polity, national survival and democratic legitimacy are reinforced by resistance. Neither side faces strong electoral incentives to accept a peace that would be widely seen as a capitulation. See later section on internal politics and economic pressures. The result is a durable stalemate with episodic escalations. Neither side can win an easy, decisive victory, and a negotiated settlement is blocked by divergent war aims, external stakeholders, and domestic politics. Until one side's calculus shifts substantially, whether through economic collapse, political change, battlefield breakthrough, or a negotiated formula that preserves core security interests, the fighting continues. The military picture: who is firing the guns? This is not a single-actor conflict. The guns are held by a constellation of forces and actors across multiple types of armed power. A. Russian Federation forces, regular army plus proxies plus private military companies. Russia's armed forces provide the largest concentration of guns and heavy firepower on the battlefield. Rocket artillery, S-300s repurposed BM-21 Grad Tornado, long-range cruise and ballistic missiles, heavy armor, electronic warfare, and air assets. Russia also relies heavily on artillery. Massed shelling remains the principal cause of urban destruction and civilian casualties. Think tank assessments repeatedly show that Russian doctrine emphasizes firepower and positional warfare, accepting high logistics and personnel costs to hold and seize ground. In addition, the Kremlin has relied on private military companies, PMCs, most prominently Wagner earlier in the war, and other paramilitary units, mobilized volunteers, and transferred conscripts. These forces have sometimes been used for high-risk assaults, deniable operations, or to saturate defenses. Reports and assessments document the wide use of irregular units and the mixing of regular and irregular forces. B. Ukrainian armed forces and territorial units. Ukraine's military has transformed since 2014, and especially since 2022. It fields a large, motivated force of regulars, territorial defense units, and special operations, supplemented by foreign volunteer battalions and training. Ukraine's strengths are maneuver, precision fires, increasingly, recon and targeting, and adaptability. Western systems, precision-guided artillery, HIMARS and other rocket artillery, counter-battery radars, drones, recon and attack, air defense, have increased Kiev's ability to hit Russian supply, command nodes, and to conduct counterattacks. C. Indirect actors and suppliers. A key fact of the war: many of the guns are supplied, directly or indirectly, by foreign partners. Weapons, trained personnel, intelligence sharing, spare parts, and logistics come from the US, EU members, and other countries. This external flow has a multiplying effect. It keeps Ukrainian forces supplied with what they need to conduct high-tempo operations. Conversely, Russia has attempted to source material from sanctioned or non-sanctioning states, from covert procurement networks, and by expanding domestic production under sanctions. These parallel supply routes prolong the war by removing resource constraints that might otherwise force a quick settlement. D. Hybrid and gray zone actors. The conflict features cyberattacks, economic coercion, information operations, and sabotage, carried out by state agencies, proxies, or third-party groups. These non-gun attacks degrade infrastructure, disrupt public morale, and shape international perceptions, all of which influence bargaining positions and prolong hostility. Who is profiting, and who is losing? This question is morally charged and politically explosive. War produces winners, but they are usually a narrow set of actors. The mass of people, ordinary civilians, small businesses, public services, pay most of the costs. Below is a fact-based look at who has recorded gains and who has borne the losses. The losers' vast majority: civilians in Ukraine, direct casualties, displacement, destroyed homes, interrupted schooling, and healthcare. Attacks on power and energy systems have caused winter humanitarian crises and economic slowdowns. Humanitarian agencies record millions needing assistance and repeated attacks on hospitals and schools. The reconstruction estimate, $524 billion, signals the scale of damage and future burden. Russian civilians, broadly sanctions, inflation, supply disruptions, absence of international business investment, and the economic burdens of sustained forces abroad depress living standards. Reports and macroeconomic assessments show that Russian GDP and disposable income are below what pre-war trends would have predicted. Regional economies and global consumers. Energy price volatility disrupted grain exports. Ukraine is a major grain exporter, and supply chain shocks have raised food and energy costs globally, hitting vulnerable populations worldwide. Measurable beneficiaries. Concentrated defense and arms firms. In multiple countries, the war generated huge demand for weapons, ammunition, and logistics. Companies manufacturing artillery, precision munitions, counter-battery systems, drones, armor, and maintenance services have seen record order books. Reports and market analyses highlight big profits for major defense contractors supplying Western states and Ukraine. While these firms are not running the war alone, their commercial success creates domestic political constituencies that favor continued resourcing rather than withdrawal. Certain Russian oligarchs and firms. Despite sanctions, some Russian business actors have benefited indirectly, acquiring assets of Western firms exiting Russia at below-market prices, profiting from import substitution industries, or capturing government procurement contracts in a militarized economy. Research shows a small number of businesspeople expanded their influence and consolidated domestic market positions post-2022. That said, Russian elites are not uniformly better off. Sanctions and capital flight have harmed many. Illicit actors and black market networks. Wars create opportunities for smuggling, illegal trade in commodities, fuel, metals, human trafficking, and corruption around reconstruction and procurement. These shadow profits are hard to estimate, but are structurally durable in prolonged conflicts. Geopolitical leverage for third states. Countries that supply weapons or offer political cover can gain strategic influence. Conversely, states that broker deals or play mediator can convert a stake in peace to diplomatic capital and future leverage in Europe's security settlement. The economic accounting. How much is this war costing? Numbers are notoriously contested, but multiple independent institutions converge on a dire economic picture. Ukraine's direct needs. Reconstruction and recovery costs were estimated at roughly $524 billion to cover damage and rebuilding over 3 years, an amount far exceeding Ukraine's annual GDP and requiring long-term international financing. This figure accounts for housing, transport, energy, and social infrastructure. Russia's economy. While early predictions of a catastrophic collapse did not fully materialize, economic indicators show significant damage. GDP is below pre-war trends. Inflation and real income have fallen compared to where they would have been, and the economy has been reoriented toward a military segment. Sanctions have inflicted real costs, though Moscow has mitigated some effects through fiscal measures and alternative trade channels. Analysts place cumulative economic losses in the hundreds of billions relative to pre-war trajectories. Daily fiscal burn. Past estimates suggested the daily cost to Russia might range from several hundred million to over $1 billion when factoring military spending, material use, and macroeconomic impacts, a figure that varies over time and depends on domestic resource mobilization. For Ukraine, heavy defense spending, budget deficits, and reconstruction needs have produced wide fiscal gaps requiring donor support. The OECD reported defense spending near 25% of Ukraine's GDP, with public debt rising steeply. The macro conclusion. The economic damages are massive and open-ended. The longer the war continues, the larger the reconstruction bill and the more entrenched wartime economic interests become. The politics of external aid. Lifeline or lifeline with strings. Foreign military and economic aid to Ukraine is a decisive variable. It allows Kyiv to remain militarily viable and to regenerate forces and material. But aid is political and conditional in complex ways. Domestic politics in donor countries shape the quantity and continuity of aid. Changes in government, fiscal pressures, public opinion, and competing priorities influence future assistance. Some donors have ramped up support. Others have been more cautious. This creates an environment of uncertainty. Ukraine must plan for both continued flows and the risk of reduced support. Supply chain and industrial capacity. Western governments have committed billions in financing, but the ability of defense industry supply chains to produce munitions at wartime scale is finite. This is one reason why shortages of shells and artillery have periodically become a concern. The durability of Ukraine's fighting capacity partly depends on sustained industrial output in allied countries. Sanctions and economic pressure on Russia. Sanctions aim to degrade Russia's ability to finance war. They have produced real pain but also adaptation and evasion. The unilateral and multilateral sanctions architecture continues to evolve, even into 2025, with additional designations and tighter measures. Sanctions are necessary for pressure, but are not guaranteed to produce immediate behavior change. Why peace is difficult. Bargaining, trust, and the wartime bargaining problem. Conflict resolution theory helps explain why peace is so elusive. War is costly for both sides. In principle, rational actors should find negotiated deals that avoid those costs. But several practical impediments make bargaining fail. Private information and credible commitment problems. Each side fears being punished after conceding territory or security. Without strong, verifiable guarantees, concessions look risky. Trusted, enforceable guarantees, e.g. security guarantees, peacekeeping, neutral status, are difficult to design and politically costly. First strike and territorial control. On the ground, whoever holds territory has bargaining leverage. Both sides thus have incentives to keep fighting to change facts on the ground and improve negotiating posture. Multiple audiences and veto players. Political leaders must answer not only to foreign counterparts, but to domestic elites, security services, oligarchic interests, and nationalist constituencies that may reject compromise. This multiplicity makes flexible diplomacy harder. Escalation risk and nuclear signaling. The presence of nuclear capabilities and rhetoric increases risk. Even if nuclear use is improbable, The shadow of escalation changes strategic calculations and makes some diplomats wary of forcing a cornered adversary. All of these features mean that even when rational actors prefer peace ex ante, the structural features of the war make a negotiated settlement unusually hard to achieve without major shifts in battlefield dynamics or credible external enforcement. Disinformation, media, and moral economy. The war is fought not only on fields and in cities, but in facts and narratives. Propaganda, censorship, and targeted disinformation shape domestic perceptions in Russia and elsewhere. Social and mainstream media amplify atrocities, grievances, and fears. This information war hardens the public and reduces the political space for compromise. Moreover, competing narratives about responsibility and historical grievances make it hard to construct a shared factual basis for talks. Corruption, profiteering, and the shadow economy of war. Where institutions are weak, prolonged conflict creates fertile ground for corruption. Inflated procurement contracts, phantom projects, illicit profits from reconstruction funds, and black market supply chains. Investigations and policy reports have documented cases where wartime contracting and emergency procurement have been exploited. In Russia, wartime import substitution and state procurement have enriched specific firms and insiders. In Ukraine, the scale of reconstruction funding creates risks that demand transparent international oversight. Without strong accountability, war profiteers, legal and illegal, will continue to exploit the system. Regional and global spillovers. Ukraine's war reshaped global geopolitics. Energy markets, grain prices. Ukraine is a major grain exporter. Global defense postures and alliances. Europe is increasing defense spending. NATO is adapting. Third-party states are recalibrating their relations with Russia and the West. These shifts make the war more than local. It is now a structuring event for the entire Euro-Atlantic order. A deeper look at the main beneficiaries, evidence and nuance. It is tempting to say, someone is making money, therefore they want the war to continue. The truth is more complex. Western defense contractors have profited from orders placed by governments. Public reports and market analysis show increased revenues for specific firms. But governments, not private firms alone, decide procurement and foreign military sales. The political calculus in democratic states includes public opinion and budget oversight. Arms firms lobby, but they do not unilaterally dictate foreign policy. Russian insiders. Some oligarchs and state firms have indeed gained from domestic market reallocation and government spending. The war has accelerated state consolidation of key sectors. Research indicates specific trends: asset transfers, discounted acquisitions, and growth in sectors linked to state procurement. However, these gains coexist with broader economic pain, capital controls, and reduced private investment. Illicit networks, smuggling, and black markets capture some of the wartime rents. These activities are destructive and undermine long-term governance. The gains are real but morally and legally corrosive. Bottom line, a narrow set of actors has benefited financially or politically in measurable ways. But the broad societal effect is overwhelmingly negative for most people both in Ukraine and inside Russia. Global consumers also experience price shocks. Identifying profiteers matters for accountability, but it is not a substitute for addressing the structural reasons the war persists. Is there a plausible path to peace? Possible paths exist, but each demands painful trade-offs. A decisive battlefield victory by one side. Historically rare and costly. A Russian rout seems unlikely given current balances. A Ukrainian rout of Russia is equally unrealistic without extraordinary shifts in material or political collapse inside Russia. Negotiated a settlement with international guarantees. This requires face-saving mechanisms for both sides, credible third-party enforcement, e.g. international peacekeepers, and a durable architecture to address security concerns, neutrality, demilitarized zones, long-term monitoring. Designing such a package would be complex and politically fraught, but possible if both sides' leaderships decide domestic politics allow a compromise. Frozen conflict/ceasefire without full settlement. The conflict could ossify into a long stalemate with low-intensity fighting and periodic escalations. That outcome preserves ongoing human suffering and creates a protracted reconstruction and security challenge. Political change in a major stakeholder. Leadership changes in Russia, the US, or major European powers could reset incentives. This is uncertain and carries risks of instability. Any credible peace requires external guarantees, economic, military, legal. And those guarantees require political will among the major powers. What needs to happen next? A program for the reduction of violence and durable peace. From a policy and humanitarian perspective, practical steps that would reduce suffering and improve prospects for a durable settlement include immediate humanitarian protections, ceasefire corridors, protected humanitarian delivery, winterization of energy and shelter, coordinated with the UN and NGOs to preserve life while diplomacy proceeds. A stepped approach to de-escalation. Localized ceasefires, prisoner exchanges, and verified withdrawal from selected areas to build trust. These steps are incremental, but can create the conditions for broader talks. An international reconstruction and accountability framework. Link reconstruction funding to strong transparency and anti-corruption mechanisms to reduce wartime profiteering. A durable security architecture. A negotiated set of guarantees and verification mechanisms for both Ukraine and Russia, perhaps including neutral status, phased security assurances, and multinational peacekeeping contingents, though politically hard. These are the bones of a durable settlement. Engagement with third parties. Involve states with influence over Moscow and Kyiv to craft a settlement. EU, US, Turkey, China, UN. The more stakeholders who can credibly enforce guarantees, the better. The moral ledger, where responsibility lies. Responsibility is both structural and agentive. Russia's invasion violated Ukraine's sovereignty, a clear breach of international law with vast human costs. But the moral picture also includes failures in international prevention, insufficient early deterrence, and the messy politics of managing great power competition. Compounding that are the human stories. Civilians losing homes, children out of school, families split by borders. Those human costs are often absent from high-level bargaining, but must be central to any ethical calculation about war and peace. Conclusion: not inevitable, but not easily solved. The Ukraine war continues because a complex mixture of military balance, external support, domestic politics, economic incentives, and geopolitical rivalry has entrenched the fighting. Profiteers exist, but they are a small slice of the picture. Most people, in Ukraine, in Russia, and in wider regions affected by spilled-over prices and instability, are net victims. A durable peace is possible but demands political courage, complex guarantees, transparency in reconstruction, and mechanisms to reduce the incentives to fight. Without these, the war risks becoming a chronic, grinding conflict with periodic surges of violence and mounting human, economic, and moral costs.